big week. The AI industrial complex is dominating our docket here. Apologies to Biden, Ukraine, and Nikki Haley, but we got to go AI right now. OpenAI launched Chat GPT-4o, 4.0, Monday, 3 days after Samwise came on All In as a programming note, and we'll go to Freeberg about this. We probably made a bit of a strategical or tactical error in not postponing his appearance. In fairness, Freeberg, Samwise did tell us originally he was coming on to talk about those things, but then it got pushed back. Anything you want to add to that as a programming note? Because people are wondering.
What happened, I've been talking with Sam for a while.
A year.
About coming on the show. And every time I see him, we're like, hey, you should come on the show. He's like, I want to come on the show. Okay, let's find a date. We never got a date that worked. I saw him in March and he said, hey, I want to come on the show. I said, okay, well, come on. Let me know when works. And then a couple of weeks later, he's like, what about this date in May? And I'm like, yeah, that's fine. We can make that work. He's like, well, I've got a big announcement we're going to be doing. And I was like, perfect. Come on the show. That sounds great. And then the night before, he texted me, he's like, hey, we're actually not going to have this announcement happen tomorrow. It's going to be delayed. He didn't tell me how long. And I'm like, well, is it GPT-5? He's like, no, it's not GPT-5. And I was like, okay, well, come on the show anyway. Because he didn't tell me when he's doing the announcement or when it's being pushed to. So it didn't seem like that big a deal. And I thought we were just going to be able to have a good chat anyway. So it's really unfortunate, I think, the fact that the announcement happened 2 days after and he had to stay quiet about it during our interview. But that's the story. I think in the future, if someone says they've got a big announcement to do, we should probably push them if they have to delay or something like that. But,
don't beat yourself up.
But I don't think we're going to be doing a lot of these interviews anyway. I think people clearly don't love them, and it's better for us to just kind of hang out and talk. And have this happen once in a while.
I think if we had just gotten Sam on the day after the launch of GPT-4 Omni, as opposed to 3 days before, he could have talked much more freely about it, and it would have been interesting.
Great.
Yeah, it was supposed to happen same day, so it's unfortunate this all worked out this way.
The other little trick is to say you can tell us under embargo, but my understanding is they were still doing the videos over the weekend. So I think those videos and stuff, they were still figuring them out. And so, lesson learned. In terms of the interviews on the show, just to recap for people, we've done a dozen. Half of them have been presidential candidates. Sometimes they break out, sometimes they don't. Well, we follow our interest and our passion here on the pod. It's got to be interesting for us too. So if we think this person's going to be interesting, we do it. And we understand you miss a news subject, but it is what it is.
And to your point, a lot of the people that come on, and increasingly a lot of people ask to come on because they know we're not journalists. And so for all of those folks that expect us to be journalists, that's not what we are. We're for entrepreneurs, we're for business people, we're for friends, we're for technologists, we're for curious people, we're for poker players, but we're not for journalists. And so we're going to ask whatever we feel like asking. Sometimes those things will touch a chord because it's what you wanted to have asked. And sometimes we won't go to a place, whether we didn't have time to, or whether we forgot, or whether we chose not to. And I think it's important to have that disclaimer. Like, we have day jobs and this is what we do to coalesce a bunch of information in the way that we're thinking about the world. So we are not journalists. So please don't have that expectation.
And I think what that means is that if the guest doesn't want to talk about something, we're not going to start peppering him with gotcha questions and things like that. I appeared at a conference a couple of days ago to promote Glue, which we'll get to. And the first half of the conversation was like a normal conversation about what we were launching. And then the second half was basically the reporter peppering me with fastball questions, which is fine. I knew what I was signing up for. It's a totally different style. It's a totally different style than coming on the pod and just having a normal conversation. But it's not really our job to make somebody open up if they don't want to talk.
What was the spiciest question, Sax? What was the fastball? Anything come close to your head?
No, I mean, it's not worth really getting into. You can watch it if on.
I was just curious.
Look, I kind of like sometimes when reporters pitch me fastballs because, you can strike out or you can hit it out of the park when they do that.
That's an important part here. I think, as a former editor-in-chief journalist myself, I sometimes like to ask, I would say, a challenging question in a respectful way. I did that, for example, with Vivek, just clarifying his thoughts on trans and gay rights. Wasn't disrespectful. Was thoughtful. Would you consider it spicy or hardcore? I don't think it was hardcore. He likes to talk about it.
No, but that's because you asked it from a position of curiosity. You weren't trying to catch the guy.
No.
You see the difference?
I'm actually interested in his opinion.
No, this is my point. That's why it comes out differently. And that's why I think people enjoy these conversations. And sometimes we don't get to the other kind of answer because I'm not interested in trying to gotcha somebody that's working hard.
I always have the same conditions when I do interviews, which is I don't clear questions and I don't let people edit it. But, everybody's got a different view on how to do interviews, and vive la différence. If you like it, you like it. If you like Lex Friedman's version or Tim Ferriss's version, or you prefer, Fox or CNN, go watch those interviews there. You can have a whole range of different interviews and interview styles available to you in the media landscape. We are but one. Sam Weiss mentioned on the pod last week that the next big model might not be called GPT-5. So on Monday, they launched GPT-4o. The O stands for Omni. It's everything you love about tech. It's faster, it's cheaper, it's better. But from my perspective, the real show was the massive amount of progress they made on the UI UX. The O stands for Omni, as in omnivore. It takes in audio, text, images, even your desktop and video from your camera to inform what it's doing. You can consider it like 360-degree AI. Producer Nick will show a couple of videos while I describe them here before we go to the besties for their reaction to the announcement. First, they made great progress in solving the CB problem we mentioned last week. That's where, like, when you use Siri or any of these tools, you say, hey, ChatGPT, what's 2 + 2? Over, and you have to wait. And then if you talk over each other, it breaks. They now have that working much smoother. They did an example of counting where they said speed up, slow down. They did a translator that worked really well.
I would like you to function as a translator. I have a friend here who only speaks Italian, and I only speak English. And every time you hear English, I want you to translate it to Italian. And if you hear Italian, I want you to translate it back to English. Is that good?
Perfetto.
Mark, io mi chiedo se le balene potessero parlare, cosa ci direbbero?
Mike, she wonders if whales could talk, what would they tell us?
They might ask, how do we solve linear equations?
Potrebbero chiederci come risolviamo le equazioni lineari.
Sicuramente sì.
Certainly, yes.
Great. Looks like it works.
I think Duolingo stock took a hit during that. Most impressive, to me at least, and also I had Sandeep Madra on my other podcast, and we talked about it, was their desktop and iOS app. What this app does is fascinating. It watches your desktop on your Macintosh or on your iPad or iPhone, and it does things like adaptive learning. Here's a clip of Sal Khan from Khan Academy and his son basically using a drawing app to do some arithmetic or geometry. And it does adaptive learning and basically makes a personal coach because the app is watching his son try to solve a problem.
I'm here with my son, and I'd love you to tutor him on this math problem, but don't give him the answer. You can ask questions and nudge him in the right direction, but I really want to make sure he understands it himself. And he's here in the room, so you can talk to him directly.
Can you first identify which sides of the triangle are the opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse relative to angle alpha?
All right, so I'm pretty sure this is the angle alpha right here, right?
Perfect. That's correct. Now, looking at the triangle, which side do you think is the hypotenuse?
Really,
Remember the hypotenuse?
I'm not totally sure. I think it might be this one, but I really am not sure. This side AC.
You're close. Actually, side AC is called the adjacent side to the angle alpha. The hypotenuse is the longest side of a right triangle and is directly opposite the right angle. Can you find which one is the hypotenuse?
Oh, okay, I see. So I think the hypotenuse is this really long side from A to B. Would that be correct?
Exactly. Well done.
It can also participate in Zoom calls, explain charts, all that great stuff. And so it's going to be your guide on the side. It's going to be a present, personality while you're using your apps. It's really impressive, I have to say. So I guess let's start, Freeberg, with your takeaways on all of these innovations that we saw.
I think it's become quite apparent that there's an evolution underway in model architecture. And I think you may remember we talked about this briefly with Sam last week, but we're moving away from these very big, bulky models that are released every couple of months or quarters and cost a lot of money to rebuild every time they get re-released, towards a system of models. So this multimodal system basically leverages several models at once that work together or that are linked together to respond to the inputs and to provide some generative output, and that those individual models themselves can be continuously tuned and or continuously updated. So rather than have, hey, there's this big new release that just happened, this new model just got trained, cost $10 million to train it, it's been pushed. These models can be upgraded with tuning, with upgrade features, and then linked together with other new, smaller models that are perhaps specialized for specific tasks, like doing mathematics or rendering an image or rendering a movie. And so I think what we're going to see is soon more of an obfuscation of the individual models and more of this general service type approach where the updates are happening in a more continuous fashion. I think this is the first step of OpenAI taking that architectural approach with GPT-4o. And what's behind the curtains, we don't know. We don't know how many models are there. We don't know how frequently they're being changed, whether they're being changed through actually upgrading the parameters or whether they're being fine-tuned. And so this seems to be pretty obvious. If you look at this link, one of the criticisms that initially came out when they released GPT-4o was that there was some performance degradation. And Stanford actually runs this massive multitask language understanding assessment. And they publish it, I think, daily or pretty frequently on how all the models perform. And you can see the scorecard here that GPT-4o actually outperforms GPT-4. And so this goes counter to some of the narrative that in order to get some of the performance improvements and speed improvements they got in 4o, that they actually made the model worse. And it seems actually the opposite is true, that the model's gotten slightly better. It still underperforms Cloud 3. Opus, which you can see here ranks top of these charts. But there's lots of different charts. All the companies publish their own charts. They all claim that they're better than everyone else. But I like Stanford because it's independent.
Chamath, any thoughts after seeing it and in combination with our interview? Do you think ChatGPT is running away with the consumer experience? Or do you think this is like neck and neck with some of the other players?
Not to tell tales out of school, but somebody that we all know in our group chat posted something about the fact that the consumer growth had stalled. I don't know how they knew that maybe they got some data or maybe they're an investor. You guys know what I'm talking about. And they said that they're trying to reinvigorate growth into the consumer app at OpenAI. I mean, I think this
insights as to why it might be plateauing in your perspective?
I wrote this in my annual letter, but there are these phases of growth. And when you look at like social networks as a perfect example, Friendster was magical when it was first created, right? And then you had MySpace that just ran circles around them because Friendster didn't really invest the money and the quality that it took to create a moat. And then MySpace really wasn't able to compete. So we were, Facebook, we were the 8th or 9th when we showed up on the scene and we ran circles around everybody. I think what it means is that there are these phases of product development which exist in many markets. This market, I think, is going through the same thing. And right now we're in the first, what I would call primordial ooze phase, which is everybody's kind of like running around like a chicken with their heads cut off. There's all these core basic capabilities that are still so magical when you see them. But we all know that 5 and 10 years from now, these things will be table stakes, right? And what Freeberg just showed is a table of many companies and many trillions of market cap, all effectively running to the same destination. So I think where we are is probably within 2 years of where the basic building blocks are standardized. And then I think the real businesses get built. So I will maintain my perspective here, which is the quote unquote Facebook of AI has yet to be created.
Okay. And here it is. ChatGPT web visits, as you can see, have plateaued. This data is similar web. I would agree with you, Chamath. It seems like the use cases and the looky-loos who are just trying this software because they heard about it, they've gone away. And then we have to find actual use cases. Sachs, I'm wondering.
But our friend Jason, just to kind of complete the thought, said something about the premium conversion, right? That's what he said. I don't know how he knows that. But
paid version.
Well,
paid version.
So to be clear, paid versus free. And then what Sam said on the podcast last week was, it seems like whenever they come out with something new, the old stuff becomes free. In my talk with Sunny this week, he mentioned that these new models are so much more efficient that you actually can throw the old model in the garbage. Because it's so inefficient. And these are now becoming about 90% cheaper every year, which means every 2 years, these things are going to be 99% cheaper and better.
Yep.
And it might
Pretty
be
amazing,
that OpenAI, Sachs, on a strategic level, is going to make all this free or close to free and maybe just charge for a multiplayer version. That seems to be where it's heading. You don't have to log in to use 3.5. You don't have to log in to use Google. No, you do have to log in still on Google services, but I think these are going to just be free. So on a product basis, what are your thoughts? And then maybe you could talk about free to pay. Do you think everybody in the world is going to pay 20, 30, 40 bucks, 500 a year, 200 a year to have one of these? Or are they just going to all be free?
Well, I think you're assuming there that the long-term business model of OpenAI is in B2C subscriptions. And I think that's probably the least attractive business model they have available to them. It's sort of the first one and the most obvious one because they put out ChatGPT and then it's pretty easy just to roll out a premium version. But in my experience, B2C subscriptions, it's just not a very attractive business model because consumers just aren't willing to pay a lot and they have high churn rates and there's no possibility of expansion really. So I suspect they're going to move in more of a B2B direction over time because that's where the real money is. And probably the way they do that is by monetizing all the apps that are built on top of it. And I think that in that sense, GPT-4o is a really important innovation. By the way, the O stands for Omni, which I think stands for omni-channel. I think you may have said omnivore.
Well,
which is kind of funny too.
Yes, it's Omni. Yeah, which means all the different media types currently coming in, right? Like that's the difference. It's not like you just give it an image or give it a video. It's absorbing all those at the same time in parallel, I believe.
That's right. So there's three big innovations with this model, right? So one is omni-channel, which means text, audio, video, and images. Second, it's more conversational. Like it understands the tone of people talking. It understands sort of sentiment in a way it didn't before. And then the third thing, which is really important, is that it's just much faster and more performant than the previous version, GPT-4 Turbo. In the speed test, they say it's twice as fast. We've played with it at Glue. We can talk about that in a minute. And it feels 10 times as fast. It is much faster. But it's the combination of all three of these things that really makes some magical experiences possible. Because when you increase the speed of processing, you can now actually have conversations with it in a much more natural way. Before, it was the models were just too slow, so there'd be a long delay after every prompt. Yeah. So now, like you showed, it can do things like you point the camera at a blackboard or something with math equations on it, and it can walk you through how to solve that problem. Or two people can be talking and it does real-time translation. You know, there's that old saying that every Star Trek technology eventually becomes true. They've just basically invented the whole natural language, real-time universal translator.
Yeah.
So anyway, so those are some interesting use cases. But I just think they're going to be able to unleash a whole lot of new applications. And if they're metering the usage of the models and providing the best dev tools, I think there is a business model there.
And this thing is moving so fast. They're in like Leonardo DiCaprio mode. Every 2 years, they throw the old model away. Okay, let's keep... Thank you, Sachs.
Bada bing.
Is this thing on?
Did you write that ahead of time, or
I was in the moment?
That was good.
Just one point on that is there are a whole bunch of startups out there that were creating virtual customer support agents, and they've been spending the last couple of years working on trying to make those agents more conversational, quicker, more responsive. I think their product roadmaps just became obsolete. Now, that's not to say there isn't more work for them to do in workflow in terms of integrating the AI with customer support tools and doing that last mile of customizing the model for the vertical specific problems of customer support. But my guess is that hundreds of millions of dollars of R&D just went out the window. And probably this is the best time to be creating a customer support agent company. If you're doing it 2 years ago, 5 years ago, your work has just like been obsoleted.
That is the thing of this pace. Like, you used to have to throw away client server stuff or, whatever. You had a web-based thing, you get an app out, you throw away some of the old code. But this is like every 18 months, your work has been replaced.
If you're an app developer, the key thing to understand is where does model innovation end and your innovation begin? Because if you get that
Interesting.
wrong, you'll end up doing a bunch of stuff that the model will just obsolete in a few months.
I think you're totally right. I think that's such a really important observation. That's why I think the incentive for these folks is going to be to push this stuff into the open source. Because if you solve a problem that's operationally necessary for your business, but it isn't the core part of your business, what incentive do you have to really keep investing in this for the next 5 and 10 years to improve it? You're much better off, like Klarna, for example, right? We talked about the amazing improvement and savings that Klarna had by improving customer support. Release it in the open source, guys. Let the rest of the community take it over so that it's available to everybody else. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck supporting it. And then if and when you ever wanted to switch out a model, GPT-4o, 4 to 4o to Claude to Llama, it's going to be near impossible and it's going to be costly. So I also think, Sachs, the incentive to just push towards open source in this market, if you will, is so much more meaningful than any other market.
Yeah. I mean, listen, you were there when, I think you were there at Facebook when they did the Open Compute project and they just were like,
oh my God, talk about torching an entire market.
Explain what it is.
So there was this moment where when you were trying to build data centers, you'd have these like 1U rack mounted kind of like machines that you used. And what Facebook observed was there was only a handful of companies that provided it. And so it was unnecessarily expensive. And so Facebook just designed their own and then released the specs online. Just kind of said, here it is. And they went to these Taiwanese manufacturers and other folks and said, please make these for your cost plus a few bucks. And it was revolutionary in that market because it allowed this open platform to sort of embrace this very critical element that everybody needs. And I think there's going to be a lot of these examples inside of AI because the costs are so extreme, so much more than just building a data center for a traditional web app, that the incentives to do it are just so meaningful.